In this chapter, we're going to take a look at consciousness and its variations. So first of all, when it comes to consciousness, there are very many different types and different levels of consciousness. And so just kind of keep that in mind as we progress through this. So first of all, definition of consciousness. What is it? So William James, the first American psychologist, said that, basically consciousness is personal and immediate awareness of one's mental activities, internal sensations. What are we feeling? Definitely being aware of the external stimuli in the environment around you, as well as, planning or active problem solving. Those are all different kind of components of consciousness. So first of all, when it comes to consciousness, we need to discuss attention. So attention is known as, basically the capacity to selectively focus our senses and awareness on particular stimuli or aspects of the environment. So, I don't think we need to go into too much more detail on what attention is. But basically, we all know what it means to pay attention to something. That means, selectively focus our senses on specific stimuli. So, a couple things, here on this slide, we talk about, what are the characteristics of attention, So definitely attention has a limited capacity. It's not unlimited, it's usually short-lived, and our focus actually shifts very quickly and all throughout the day. So attention is also selective, and that just means, that we tend to pay attention to the things that are most pertinent or, important to us at the time. And last but not least, attention can be both blind and deaf. And so we will discuss that a little bit further as we progress. But once you know that, basically, we're only able to pay attention to certain things at a certain given point of time, and everything else in the environment, where even though we may be sensing it, like all the different stimuli that's in our environment or something, but we just might, be blind or deaf to it. And just kind of as a joke here, definitely included this here. So did you notice in this picture? Did you notice the clown that's riding the unicycle right here in the middle? So, my students often, they kind of get a kick out of that. They say, wow, I didn't even really notice that, because, they were maybe paying attention to other things in this picture. The children sitting, around, or, this type of thing right here, So, yeah. Just, just thought I'd make you aware of that and just help you kind of smile about that. And then when it comes to our attention, there are certain things, that are definitely kind of can be a little bit tough on our attention. Let's just put it that way. So, definitely multitasking is one of those. And multitasking, I think we all know what that is. That means we're usually doing two or more things at one time. But the thing is, is multitasking usually involves, our attention being divided. So our attention is not as strong upon one thing as we think it is. So take, for instance, they mention, using cell phones while driving. Well, driving in and of itself usually requires quite a lot of attention, noting distance between yourself and the car in front of you or next to you, speed limits, things like that, and so when our attention is divided and we're actually paying to our cell phones, then we're, putting ourselves at risk. Let's just put it that way. So, just definitely look at this and just kind of read a little further to get a little more insight into this. Okay, so we're actually conscious, throughout, as long as we're alive, we are actually conscious. Let's put it that way. So this might surprise, people who are learning about this, but even when we're asleep, we are conscious, but it's just a different level of consciousness. Different. So just keep that in mind. We will talk about that as we progress. But, definitely, I said there are different levels of consciousness, and those are actually affected in a 24-hour cycle called circadian rhythms right there. So circadian rhythms, they basically, tell our brain, they communicate with us. We feel them, the signals that tell us whether we're a little bit tired, we need to just kind of lay down, take a nap, or we're fully awake and conscious, and so we're ready to, do our daily work or our studies, etc., etc. So it's our circadian rhythms that are, that constantly are different throughout a 24-hour cycle. Okay, so circadian rhythms, they actually they actually occur in our brain. So basically, here is the system right here that, as I said, when I'm going to give you an example, okay? Let me just give you an example. So when we are alert and we wake up first thing in the morning when it's light outside, or we're, going about our day and it's light outside, well, actually light is coming into the eyes. It goes along the optic nerve, the signals, the information, and then it actually gets processed in this thing right here called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Now, I realize that's, kind of a, long word right there, but that's what's important to memorize from this slide right here, is our circadian rhythms are determined by the information that our suprachiasmatic nucleus gives to our glands, which produces, if it's telling us it's time to start winding down the day and getting ready for sleep, actually, that means the pineal gland is producing what's called melatonin, okay, right up in here. Okay, so just kind of be aware of that, all right? So when it comes to sleep, we're still conscious, but remember, those are just different levels of consciousness while we're asleep. And there are two basic types of sleep. And I actually put those in a little box right here on the right. And what's called REM sleep. And REM stands for rapid eye movement. And usually that is when we are in our deepest level of sleep. And that is when, our eyes might be twitching, which is why it's called rapid eye movement, because, our eyes are actually twitching when they're closed. And as well as maybe even our parts of our body might be twitching, things like that. But that is like the deepest phase of sleep right there. Now, there's also what's called NREM, which means non-rapid eye movement, and that's also known as quiet sleep. And so that is when you're just partially asleep, but you're not in REM sleep. Okay? And so just remember that, that. And so what's important also to realize right here is this, as I put in here, is that the brain remains active during sleep. Now, people are often surprised when they hear that. They think that when we go asleep, that we actually basically just everything turns off and we're unconscious while we're asleep. But that's actually not true. And what researchers have found is that when we are in REM sleep, our brain is actually the most active that it is throughout our entire 24-hour cycle. And there's a reason for that, because, the brain is actually doing a lot of important things when we are in REM sleep. We are going to talk about that in just a little while. So when a person is awake, their brain might be functioning differently and operating at different intensities and speeds. And those intensities and speeds are also known as brain waves. So our brains actually create a type of wave of information. We'll just leave it at that for now. But, so further, the two types of brain waves when we're awake are basically called beta brain waves. Okay, and that means those are when we're fully awake. Okay, but yet when we're starting to relax and wind down for the day and maybe, even, kicking back and starting to, getting ready to go to sleep or something, our brain actually, goes into a certain type of brain wave that's called alpha brain waves. And then once, we start getting ready to go to sleep and we start getting drowsy, and remember that is when we get into alpha brainwave states right here. We might experience some things, like right here, we talk about, hypnagogic hallucinations. That means, actually seeing or hearing things. Like, for those of you who have, maybe felt like you were falling asleep and then all of a sudden you either see something or you hear something. You hear somebody in the room speaking or something, but they're actually not there. Well, that's what's known as hypnagogic hallucinations. And also there's other things, like sensation of falling, or the body jerking suddenly. Like the body jerking, that's kind of similar to the same feeling as like when one is leaning back in a chair and then suddenly you feel yourself, losing balance and your body jerks in order to retain balance. Well, that's kind of what they call the myoclonic jerk right here. Okay, so just be aware that you don't have to memorize that name, but that term, but just kind of be aware of the idea of it. Okay. And there are other sensations, but I won't discuss those, but feel free to pause the video and look at those and just make yourself, familiar with those. So definitely our brain waves actually change, and which causes us to go into sleep. Now, you remember right here, this talks about the first 90 minutes of sleep, this little diagram right here. And so one can see that, when one is fully awake and alert, our brain is still doing beta brain waves, creating beta brain waves. And those are a little bit kind of shorter type brain waves. They're not quite as tall, and I don't expect you to memorize all that, but just be aware of it, okay? Now, as one, you can see, starts progressing and starts getting sleepier and getting into sleep, then all of a sudden we go lower and lower into consciousness, what they call that consciousness, but it's really just sleep phase, And so then we get into non-rapid eye movement sleep or NREM sleep. Okay, and we have actually 4 stages of that, excuse me. And then all of a sudden, you can see that the brain actually picks up. It actually gets very active. And then we enter REM sleep, which is fast, active brain waves. So one can see that these are short, but they're very fast. And so that's when we have rapid eye movement sleep and we start to dream and go into deep sleep, they call that. Now, what's important to understand, though, that remember I mentioned that, in the previous slide, I said, well, that was a typical 90-minute cycle, right? Well, actually, to get a good night's sleep, the average person requires 5 of those cycles. We can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So generally speaking, the average person goes through 5 of those 90-minute sleep cycles per night. Now I realize, 5 90-minute sleep cycles, a lot of people might laugh at that or smile and say, hey, I don't get that much sleep, or I don't require that much sleep. It's not a hard, fast rule. It's just a generalization, okay? All right. So why do we sleep? What really happens while we're sleeping? So this is the important stuff right here. And what I did here is I put this little down on the lower left-hand corner right here, why sleep is important. Because as we talked about in another chapter about neuroscience, actually the brain is clearing out metabolic waste products. So what does that mean? Well, kind of think of your brain as kind of like an engine. And as it functions all day long, it's thinking all day long about, lots of things. Its gears are grinding and it's creating waste materials, and it's actually our metabolism that's doing that. And that's why that's called metabolic waste products. Well, the brain is actually clearing out those metabolic waste processes as we are sleeping. And that's very important to the overall health of our brains. Now, a couple other things here too, sleep, it keeps our immune systems hopefully functioning and being a lot healthier. Now, learning and memory, that's what's really important, especially to you full-time students, or something, or even for your jobs or whatever, that actually, as we're sleeping, our brains are actually making the connections that are important to store into our long-term memories. And that's why, for those of you who have noticed that after a really good night's sleep, you just think a lot clearer, and you might even notice that you remember a little better the material or the things, that you were trying to remember from the previous day. Okay, and last but not least, sleep is important because that regulates our mood. So that's what's really important. For those of you who ever had, like rough sleep, or problems with sleeping, you'll notice that maybe your mood isn't quite the same. You might, be a little short-tempered or something, or sad feeling or something like that. And that's because not enough sleep was obtained in order to go through the process of what's actually part of our limbic system in our brains that actually help regulate our moods and help us to feel a lot more stable mood-wise. So that is why sleep is important. Okay, so I did include this chart right here because this just kind of talks about right here, and here's the important stuff in the upper left right here. Maybe what are the negative consequences of being deprived of sleep? Well, here's our most common ones right up in here in the upper left. But then remember, there are also can be risks, especially for, long-term, chronic problems with sleep. Those might create, possible health problems. And so I showed these right here that actually how sleep deprivation can affect various parts in our bodies as well, not just our brains, but throughout our actual bodies or our torsos, et cetera, et cetera. So, definitely I recommend pausing the video here and just, becoming familiar and acquainted with this stuff. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, you remember I mentioned that it's important. Sleep is important because actually memories are built during sleep. And so during non-rapid eye movement sleep, that actually contributes to forming new, what is called episodic memories. And so episodic memories basically just refer to the memories of our personally experienced events. So made a little simpler even, when we're in non-rapid eye movement sleep or NREM sleep, that actually is when we are storing the memories of, the general things that happened to us throughout the previous day. So just keep that in mind, and that can actually explain why sometimes if you notice that when you're about to fall asleep into deep sleep, you'll start thinking about things that occurred throughout the day. Well, that's because episodic memories are being formed or solidified in our brains. Now, on the other hand, rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep, right there, is what's usually responsible for what's called procedural memories. Now, procedural memories means, basically the procedures in a new skill or task until it can be performed automatically. So definitely, like anything like athletics or playing a musical instrument, or just any type of procedure or task that one needs to perform automatically, that is usually worked on, stored, and during our REM sleep. Okay, moving forward here. So you'll remember that I mentioned earlier too that definitely if we're sleep deprived, that can actually kind of cause problem with our emotional states. And so that actually occurs in different parts of the brain. And I remember I mentioned the limbic system. And the limbic system, also, contains the amygdala. And the amygdala is what's important and prone to emotional reactions to negative stimuli. Okay, and so that's what's causing one to feel a little more emotionally, especially negative emotions, when one hasn't gotten enough sleep. And so definitely you can see right here that this right here is a sleep-deprived brain right here on the left-hand side. And one can see that these areas right here are definitely, I'm sorry, excuse me, I actually got that backward here. This is not the sleep-deprived brain, it's this one on the right-hand side. So excuse me on that. So on the left-hand side, one can see that these two areas right here, this is a normal brain right here that achieved a lot of sleep. One can see that these two areas right here, they're not firing as intensely. They're not as bright and as big. Well, that is the amygdala right here. But one can see when one experiences sleep deprivation, the amygdala is actually firing a lot more intensely. One can see that it's brighter and it's bigger area right here firing. So remember, that contributes to strong negative emotional feelings. Okay, so we're going to look at dreaming. So we're shifting gears just a little bit, but remember, these are all different levels of consciousness, so we should just keep that in mind as we proceed throughout this, I guess one could say, lecture. So dreaming is kind of like, thinking under conditions of reduced sensory input and the absence of voluntary control. So just kind of keep in mind, we kind of go into, when we're dreaming, we're kind of like in a what's called sleep paralysis. Our bodies actually kind of temporarily are paralyzed. And the reason why is because our brains are so active that our bodies need to experience what is called reduced sensory input. Okay, so that's why that term is used in that. Okay, now we're going to talk about, well, what happens if one experiences sleep disorders? Like, what are they? So here are a few different types of sleep disorders, but what's important to know on this is the term dysomnia, And dysomnia basically means disruption in the amount, quality, or timing of sleep. That's it. So when one, only sleeps a couple hours and then wakes up and is awake for the rest of the night, or, something, that is usually what is called a dysomnia. Okay. And there are different types of dysomnias. There's an insomnia, there's obstructive sleep apnea, and there's what's called narcolepsy. Please pause the video and look at these a little more in detail. And I'm going to move on here. Now, the other type of sleep disorder is known as a parasomnia. And that's basically undesired arousal or actions during sleep. So that usually occurs during stages 3 and 4 of slow wave sleep, non-REM sleep. Okay. And so one isn't experiencing, sleep paralysis yet in that phase. So what happens is sometimes, an individual might experience things like sleepwalking or sleep terrors or something of that nature, and the body becomes very active, even though the brain might not be fully conscious of what's going on because it's in a partial sleep phase. So a couple, things just to kind of think about here, that dreams, as a reminder, those are basically a sequence of perceptions, thoughts, and emotions, that is experienced as a series of actual events during sleep. So we tend to, while we're dreaming, we tend to think, oh, that's real. We feel that we're really there and that is a real event, but it really, it's not. It's just a sequence of thoughts or perceptions or emotions, okay, that are definitely inside our consciousness at that time. So definitely, since we're, on the topic of sleeping, one might experience nightmares during sleeping as well. So remember those, I don't think we need to go into too much detail about what nightmares are because, a lot of us may have experienced those. But here are a few little facts about those. I'm not going to read each of these individually, but definitely look at these on your own. So what is interesting when it comes to discussing the topic of dreaming, there are, and it's in our society as part of our cultural type, historically speaking in our culture, that we tend to feel and think that dreams actually have an unconscious meaning to them. Okay. And so, often, we will wake up and experience, we'll think about a dream or something that occurred in the night and say, okay, well, that must have meant something deeper because I dreamed about it. And actually, the reason why I'm bringing this up is I'm just saying that idea was actually kind of put forth by Sigmund Freud. So he is the one that actually started the whole idea that, our dreams have significance. And he actually, wrote a very influential book. And in his studies, he, said that, and he pursued understanding the unconscious reasons, for dreams or the significance of our dreams. But one has to be a little careful of that because, this is a very, that was very early in the history of the development of psychology. And so current researchers have proposed and discovered that dreams are actually something quite different. Okay. Now, real quickly here, we're going to talk, since we are talking about different levels of consciousness, we'll talk about hypnosis, and very briefly. So what's important to understand about hypnosis, and I put this in red and I underlined an important word, but hypnosis is a cooperative social interaction. So what's important to know, is that individuals, they cannot be hypnotized against their will. Usually, hypnosis is a cooperative social interaction. So the person that, is going under hypnosis is cooperating and is willfully engaging in that behavior. So we will talk about some of the effects of hypnosis, that kind of thing, and the limits and applications, So definitely, here are some of the limits to hypnosis. And just as a reminder, it's found that, people cannot be hypnotized against their will. So regardless of maybe, some of you have seen those shows, either on YouTube or on television or something, where they're showing, the group of people being hypnotized and people think that, they might be, a chicken or, or acting in a way, that they're not aware of. But to be quite honest, that is actually just for show. And these people are not, hypnotized against their will to be something that they're not, So, people who are hypnotized, they do not perform, actions that are contrary to their personal morals and their values. Okay. And hypnosis definitely cannot make people stronger than their physical capabilities or bestow new talents. So, they cannot be hypnotized and then suddenly just lift a car over their head, or something like that. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Now, there are certain, benefits of hypnosis, so on the other hand, and it's used quite effectively in things like sports. For those of you who have ever been hypnotized to improve, sports ability or something or skills, are aware of this. But, with hypnosis, it can definitely enhance our physical skills or athletic abilities by increasing our self-confidence and our concentration. So that's what's important is we know hypnosis can increase our confidence and our concentration on our goals, or our motivation, which improves, results in increased physical skill. So that explains, why that can be effective. Okay, now we're going to talk briefly about, what about meditation? Because meditation might be a different level of consciousness as well. Okay, so definitely meditation, is, usually, it's different types of concentration techniques, that we can focus our attention and our heighten our awareness. So, for example, a common type of meditation is focusing on one's breathing. So one might just inhale for the count of 4 and then exhale for the count of 4 and then just keep doing that over and over for a certain period of time, like, 10 minutes or 20 minutes or something like that. That's just one example of a type of meditation. Now, what's important to keep in mind is I'm not talking about any type of meditation that has, like religious type motivation, or is it, I'm just talking about meditation in general, the actual psychophysical, neurophysical type considerations of that, okay? So for those of you who do meditate, then you're well aware that one can experience a certain type of change in their consciousness, or at least their attention, what they're focusing on, and the benefits of it, might be increased relaxation or focusing of their brains, or et cetera, et cetera. Now, some of the scientific studies of meditation, so like this Buddhist monk right here, had an EEG study that monitored their brain waves during meditation. And, research has shown, that definitely improved concentration, perceptual discrimination and attention. Okay. Definitely, emotional control and well-being, and reducing stress, and its physical effects, at a minimum, those are some of the benefits of meditation. Another thing too that they have found in various studies is those who are engaged in regular meditation can actually, have increased neuronal type matter in their brains too. So just kind of be aware of that. That doesn't mean it makes them, necessarily smarter, but it can change the structural physiology of the human brain. Okay, so switching gears again, we're just going to briefly talk about, since we are talking about, concentration, and so definitely drugs can alter our concentration, or our awareness, and that kind of thing. Okay, our consciousness. So definitely, psychoactive drugs. Those are chemicals that can alter our arousal, mood, thinking, sensation, and perception. And here's some of the psychoactive drugs. There's depressants, there's opiates, there are stimulants, and there are psychedelic drugs. And so those can all affect our consciousness in different ways. So these brain scans right here, they just show, that definitely, addictive drugs, they can, can definitely affect the human brain and how it functions. So, we don't have to memorize completely, what's going on here. But those of you who are interested, definitely pause and look this over in a little more detail. But what's important to know though, is addictive drugs, they definitely do affect the function of our brain, of the human brain. Okay. So just real quick, depressants, since we are talking about psychoactive drugs, depressants, those actually depress or inhibit the central nervous system activity. So you remember the central nervous system means the brain and the spinal cord. So that can that can actually result in increased drowsiness, feeling sedated, or even sleeping. Okay. They can also, definitely have addictive effects. And so here are some certain kinds of depressants right here, some certain examples, like alcohol, barbiturates, inhalants, tranquilizers. So definitely be aware of that. Now, there's also what's known as stimulant drugs, and those actually increase brain activity. And so definitely keep that in mind. That can be anything like some examples are caffeine, nicotine, amphetamines, cocaine. One thing that's kind of interesting, definitely the most widely used stimulant drug in the entire world is definitely caffeine, actually. And so those of you who like, to use a lot of caffeine, drink a lot of coffee and that kind of thing, might be a little surprised at that. And I admit, I definitely can't get through my morning without having a certain amount of coffee. So I'm aware of that as well. So here's just a few, of the types of things, that are associated with caffeine or nicotine. Definitely pause and look at these on your own. And moving forward, we have what's called psychedelic drugs as well. And that can be a bunch of things, like LSD, and basically things like mescaline, and et cetera, and so this talks about how they actually affect the brain. And what happens is things like psychedelic drugs, they actually, mimic the serotonin levels in the brain, which is why temporarily one's consciousness, feels like, wow, this feels great. I feel like it can do anything. That's because it actually mimics the serotonin levels in their brain. Those of you, who remember from our neuroscience chapter, we talked about, all the type of receptors and the neurotransmitters in the brain. And definitely, serotonin is a neurotransmitter. Now, other psychedelic drugs, definitely, marijuana is a pretty well-known, popular one, especially here in Colorado, since that is legal now. And so definitely, so here's exactly what to, maybe think about is, well, why does marijuana have the effect? Why do I feel different? Why does my consciousness change, when I, engage in marijuana use or something? And these actually talk about all the different things that happen in the brain as one is using marijuana. Okay, so view those on your own. And so definitely, in order to try to avoid, things like insomnia and sleep problems, one has to just sort of, here's a few suggestions, okay? So we're wrapping up our conversation, and I just wanted to give you a few things to think about, okay? So in order to get a good night's sleep, definitely try to limit the amount of stimulants that you will take during the day, stimulant intake. Try to establish a quiet bedtime routine. For those of you who already do that, awesome. For those of you who do not, maybe consider that. All right, create conditions for restful sleep. So that means, maybe have a, darkened room, make sure too much light isn't coming in, or there's light shining from outside into your bedroom or something like that. As well as noise. One might be near a noisy street or something like that. So one might consider running a fan or a noise generator or something, to drown out outside noise, that kind of thing. All right. And then a consistent sleep-wake schedule. And that can be hard to do for sure. But try to maybe, go to bed at the same time every night and try to wake up at the same time every morning, that kind of thing. These are just some suggestions, and I realize that, real life, can make this kind of difficult. But definitely maybe just, take that into consideration. So that concludes our discussion. So the next step, definitely after viewing this video is definitely get the study guide for this chapter and begin to answer its questions. And I will see you in class and talk to you then.